Hello, Analisa.
Hi.
How are you
Hi.
today?
I'm so good. I'm so good. Thank you for having me. I'm always so happy to have these intentional conversations with other artists
Yeah,
as well.
I'm so pumped. So for those people who are listening, who don't know who you are, introduce yourself today. Who are you today?
Who am I today? I am Analisa Leaming. I use she, her pronouns. I was raised mostly in Tennessee. I always have been, I'm one of those ones like many of us who our parents will say they were singing before they were speaking.
Mhm.
Actually, like my son is as well.
Oh,
Interestingly, I just realized that. Um, and oh gosh, what does that mean for him?
possibility. That's what that means. Endless possibility. Who knows? Who's to say?
So, in my town just outside of Nashville, the access that I had to music and all of that. I mean, I did all the musicals at school and church and all of that. And my voice teacher sang with the Nashville Opera.
Mm.
And so that and like my choir directors were my major influence as far as what direction I would go in. And so while I wanted to do musical theater, I had nobody in my world that had any expertise in that. And so my voice teacher said, "You have to study classically in college. You cannot study musical theater. They will ruin your voice."
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, so that was my path, and I could do it, and I thought it was fun. I thought it was boring, but I thought it was fun to do, boring to watch. And so I went to the University of Memphis for a couple of years and transferred to the Eastman School of Music, which
Hmm.
was for me an amazing place to be, and my the guidance in my life, whatever that greater force is that is co-creating alongside me, put me there. The Lauded Lenya competition for singers happened at the time to be held at Eastman. So I saw
Mm.
people doing opera and musical theater. And my senior year, I competed in the competition and won second prize. And
Yes.
one of the judges was Ted Sperling, who conducts everything at Lincoln Center. Another was Ted Chapin, who is president of the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization. And they were both, and I was actually going to go to CCM for my master's in opera.
Mm.
And but from that, all of a sudden I had Bernie Telsey's office calling me, which meant nothing to me then, saying, "Come to Lincoln Center and audition for South Pacific." And then so that was my way in, and that was what brought me to New York, and I deferred on my master's, and um, that was my path to musical theater. And that was one of the first times that I can think of where I just trusted my gut, and it didn't make sense. There was nothing on
Mm.
paper. No, it didn't make sense in a linear way to go from here to here. But it just felt right. And I think looking back on the last 15 years of my life of being a professional in our field is that so many of the next thing that I've done hasn't necessarily made sense
Right.
to somebody else on paper, or like isn't maybe the next logical step. So I think that's something that defines me, something that I like taking risks.
Hmm.
I like doing the scary thing.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about, what does natural childbirth, I'm sorry, not natural childbirth, unmedicated childbirth,
Right.
it's an old term, natural, unmedicated childbirth and skydiving have in common for me is that there are things that like have scared the shit out of me, but I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
what's on the other side of fear? Those are some fun facts about me. And so here I am. I've had um the great joy of getting to perform in 4 Broadway shows, of touring the country, of working regionally, of doing concerts around the world. And now I'm pivoting again. And I will always be a performer. but I'm now going more into full-time coaching of artists, and I've just
Mhm.
sold my house in New Jersey, and
Wow,
we are
congrats.
moving across country. We don't know where we will land, but we will spend our summer in the mountains of Salt Lake City,
Oh,
and then we'll see. So talk about risk and following intuition.
wow.
Here we are.
Oh my gosh, how what an exciting moment of
Yeah.
full change
Yeah.
across the board. This is
Yeah.
I I wanna jump off of what you're saying, I wanted to jump directly into risk. What does risk mean to you? I know as somebody for myself, I have my own definition of which I'll share perhaps after you share yours so that we're talking the same language. But
Mm,
I'm curious because you that came up in your intro of like you are
yeah.
drawn to these things that perhaps are
Yeah.
not linear and
Yeah.
feel it. What is that to you?
Well, I've never defined it before, so let's see what comes up.
Yeah.
For me, I think of a risk as, like I said, it doesn't necessarily make logical sense. It doesn't make
Mhm.
sense to leave a Broadway show that you've not been in that long, that you're starring in, to go on the road to do a
Right.
show, but I did it anyway. That's not that big of a risk, but that's an example of something that doesn't necessarily make as much sense. Also, that the biggest to me is like when you don't know what something is going to look like,
Mhm.
but it feels like something that you want to do. It scares you a little bit. It has to scare you or it's not a risk. It has to
Right.
make you go, "Oh God, is this right?" And you don't pad it with like all the nets underneath it with all the plan Bs. Like there's nothing wrong with a plan B, but have a plan B, sure.
Mhm.
But but you don't know. This is so silly. This like video game analogy is coming to me where like there's nothing here. You're on this thing and you're gonna leap and you could die.
Yeah.
But like as you're leaping, this thing appears and you land.
Yeah.
Feels like risk.
Yeah. I feel like mine under conceptually is probably the same where there isn't necessarily the safety net that you rely on. And I think for me, risk has a more exciting like feeling in my body than fear-based decision making, if that
Yeah.
makes sense, right?
Yeah,
Where like
for
the
sure.
risk for me of skiing, for example, which is one of my favorite things, every time I put on my skis, these past 2 winters, I've been able to go live up in Vermont for almost 2 months and just like do the thing, right? Which has been a wonderful blessing of this pandemic strange time and great privilege, frankly. But putting on those skis and going down the mountain, every time I did it, it's a risk. It is a desperately dangerous sport when you are flying down a mountain at multiple miles per hour. And there's always a risk involved. But in my body, in my feelings, in I'd say like my heart and maybe my gut, it's something that the
Yeah.
reward is always greater than the risk.
Yeah.
Um, in that no matter what happens when I'm flying on that mountain, I know I'd say that retrospectively if something, God forbid, did happen, but whatever happens on that mountain, I enjoyed my time because there was always something that I could grow and learn from in that moment physically also.
Yeah. And then when you have that fear, like let's use my childbirth as an example. Like
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to have this experience of an unmedicated birth. And but like it's scary, but there's this thing that draws you to it cuz it's like I want to know if I can do it. I
Mhm.
want to know if I can dig deep enough even if it's a 24-hour labor and it's the hardest thing I've ever done. I want to see what I'm capable of and I want to go
Yeah.
beyond my mind. I want to go beyond my thoughts. And so same thing when I was like flying up in the plane and I'm terrified of heights. But I'm like, what's on the other side of these thoughts telling me,
Mhm.
don't do it. This is scary. Don't do it. Don't do it. Is like, what if I can just be in that fear
Yeah.
and see what's on the other side? And so the reward is usually greater because you get this feeling of resilience and strength and
Mhm.
expansion. And you're like, oh my God, now the world looks different
Yeah.
than it did before.
Yeah. What do you think has empowered you to lean into that throughout the course of your career or certainly now in this part in your life?
Well, my mom is the same way. So I think it's in my bones.
Yeah.
I think yeah, I didn't grow up with a lot of fear in
Mhm.
my home. She's a very resourceful human and it was always like How can we figure this out? How can we do it? So that's just part of my thinking. And I respect and honor people that don't have that and are riddled with a little more fear and want stability. I think I'm allergic to stability. As soon as I get really comfortable, I'm like, okay, we're not growing. What's happening? And maybe that's not great either, but it feels good to me.
Yeah. Well, I guess an interesting question then is when you work with, students of yours, or when you are coaching somebody who perhaps is more fear-based or does have more of that to deal with, what would be some ways in which you can empower somebody to navigate through that, or feel those feelings and own them in a way that allows them to move through?
Yeah. Well, I think it's just that. I think it's learning to separate our emotions and feelings from the thoughts. They're very different things, but most of us don't know. So most of us will say, well, I'm feeling afraid that blah, 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 blah. And it's all one thing. It's like the feeling and the thought, or the feeling and the story, are just like this one thing. And so most of us try to manage only the thought, and we try to just change the thought, but the emotion's still in our body. And so my way in now, and this was through the paradox process, which I'm a facilitator of, and we can chat about that later, but our entryway into transformation is through the emotion. And so just going, what am I feeling? And I use a list of feeling definitions, because again, most of us don't really know, but the more specific we can get, it's like, is it worry or hopelessness or helplessness or despair or frustration? Like, what is it? And then and then we're like, one of my favorite questions is, if an alien were sitting in front of me that had never felt before, how would you describe the physical sensations of this fear? And that immediately helps us drop out of our head and into our body. It's like constriction. It's tight. It's heart racing. It's a lump in my throat. And then just being with the feeling and noticing the mind wants to bobble up. You want to bobble back into your mind and explain why you should be afraid and all that. But can you just stick with the emotion and feel it? And then here's a Brene Brown for you, right? Emotions have a beginning, middle, and end. And if you sit with it, you'll find the crest, and then it'll start to dissipate, and you become objective about it. And I think that's where I find is, it's like, oh, I have the fear. I have the fear. Am I making a mistake? Should I be going to, what am I doing? Why have I sold my house? Right. But I'm objective about it. And so it can just be, and I don't have to get rid of it, but it's not running the show. So I think for people who maybe their emotions, maybe their life is a series of just reacting to emotions. And they don't know it, and the emotions kind of like driving the bus, and the stories that the emotions are generating are driving the bus. So just bringing it back to the body. What am I feeling? Can I just feel it? And now from that objectivity, what do I know now? What is the truth? Because I'm not in my fight or flight anymore. And so it's like, okay, maybe it's worth the risk of emailing Bart Shear and trying to get an appointment for something, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about paradox process. How did you get involved in it? What exactly is it? What drew you to that generally?
So I was in a show with Linda Muggleston. She is mama of Broadway, currently in The Music Man. I think this is her 13th Broadway show, something like that. I know. And so she had been going to a facilitator there for a long time. And when I was expressing wanting to find somebody to go along with my husband for therapy, and she was like, well, you should check out Paradox. It's not quite therapy. It's its own thing. I went online, saw the video. So my husband and I went, and I mean, he worked wonders in our relationship. It was amazing. Thomas Jones, he created the process, and we call it an emotional management system. Because as I was saying, most of us don't have the tools to manage our emotions, the language to manage our emotions, and don't realize how much our emotions are actually running the show. And so anyway, I was a student of Thomas's or a client of Thomas's for several years. He was on my podcast multiple times. And then during the pandemic, I started teaching voice. And a lot more than I ever had before. And I just found myself so drawn to like what's going on here and what's going on here. And that it's so not about like, can you lift your soft palate here? Oftentimes, if we're in alignment, it'll happen. And so I just found myself wanting to talk about these things so much more than, what vowel you're singing.
Right.
And so then I started going, I'm going to go back to school for sports psychology, and I'm going to become that in our world, in our business. And then an email came about becoming a paradox facilitator. And it was just that perfect divine timing. And it was, yes. So I reached out to them and said, hey, here's what I'm thinking. I want to kind of merge it in within my teaching. So they said, come on. And that was in January of last year of 2021. And I finished my training pretty quickly. I did my test, I got my hours, and I started working in August of last year. And I very quickly have moved from teaching voice and incorporating that to just kind of full-time coaching. It's what I am so passionate about. It's a part of what I'm doing. But this process has utterly changed my life. And more than the 5 years before when I had worked intermittently with Thomas, it's really been about implementing it on my own every day in my life. It has changed the way I relate to others, myself. I can't say enough about it.
Is it more a matter of just simply being able to engage with these emotions and then make them into an objective move forward? Or is there something more to it that has been so compelling for you?
Yeah, there's a few aspects of it. The emotions. Oh man, I just had no idea how often things like fear or self-doubt, those are probably like, shame. That's probably like one of my greatest hits. So probably shame and self-doubt were keeping me attached to things like relationships, fear with money, these sorts of things. So getting to untie those knots through the emotion rather than just changing my thinking, which I'd been doing for years and years. And you can get far that way. But then to me, it felt like a limit. And this felt like this unlocked that next level to keep unraveling those patterns for myself. And then there's this whole aspect of then you start to see your stories differently. So the stories that I'm telling, I now can release that emotion and start to tell other stories. I can deliberately create whatever I want to create.
Right.
And then another aspect is detaching, becoming detached, which I just didn't quite, I have been talking about that for years and years. And I really think that's part of my success, is being able to release attachments to the outcomes in auditions. But there were many other areas of my life where I was so attached. So
when you say attached, do you mean just to like result oriented, or is it more a matter of assigning the feelings to the thing and then holding on to those feelings?
Yeah, both, all of the above and more. So you want an example? Let's have like a real life example. Here's a silly example that is vulnerable to say, but I know probably anybody listening can relate to this. So let's talk social media.
Great.
Okay. We like to all pretend like we're not attached.
Or like literally scientifically attached, like we are clinically addicted. Correct. Yes.
Right. But like, especially people who are on some sort of spiritual path or like growth mindset, who cares how many followers we have and how many likes my posts get, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's that how much I care about what other people think directly affects what I post and the truth that I speak on that platform. And so now I have this tool for detaching. So short explanation, we use these little key phrases depending on what we're working on. So for detaching, we use a little key phrase called detach clear, sort of a pattern disruptor for our brain. And so here's one way in. You just start ranting on all the things you're attached to by saying, I need. And if you feel resistance, and anybody can like pause this and try it right after I share. So if you feel resistance to it, it's because there's a higher part of yourself the intellectual part of yourself that goes, I know I don't need these things. I know I'm not really blah, blah, blah. But there's a part of us that does.
Mhm.
It's like we can think of it as our inner child or the starving artist within us or whatever that is. They believe that.
Right.
So let them do the rant and just kind of like, I need people to love and approve of everything that I post. Detach, clear. I need to get more followers. Detach, clear. I need to look good. Detach, clear. I need people to think I'm an expert in my field. Detach, clear. I need people to see my content because it's important. Detach, clear. I need, right? And you just kind of let it go. And then you step back for a second and you check in and you're like, whoa. If you're not connected with that, see how like when that's in your subconscious, it's going to hinder me from showing up in the way that I authentically want to show up.
Mhm.
And so I start to bring that from the subconscious to the conscious mind. And then I'm like, oh, and I let that go. And when I started doing that, I could actually merge my A Balancing Act work with who I am as an actor. That was like, that key helped me do that. Before then, I kept them so separate. I was so concerned about what my actor friends thought about my podcast and like that part of me. And I held A Balancing Act down and like wouldn't shine. So concerned about what people thought. So I release all those attachments to that. You can do that with auditions. I need this job, detach, clear. I need them to love me, detach, clear. I need to be everything I think they want. Detach, clear. I
Yeah.
need to be perfect. Detach, clear. Yeah. What do
Is
you
it
think?
is it the detach clear? I guess I'm just clocking myself, like hearing the word detach. So
Yeah,
I want
tell
to
me.
unpack it before we come back into it. For me, when I think about detach, I actually feel, or I feel in my body a level of resistance because I'm hearing it as disconnecting from truth. And I guess maybe it's not about disconnecting from the truth as opposed to reassigning what truth actually is in that moment. Is that what it is?
Right. Because my truth is not that, let's say I'm going into an audition I care about deeply. My truth is not that I need to be perfect and have everybody love me and book the job. I'm detaching from that. So I wouldn't say like, I need to shine my light unapologetically, detach, clear. Like I have that. That is I mean, we could talk about that because that's interesting too.
Yeah.
But from what you're saying, I'm detaching from my ego's needs. I'm detaching from my little self. I'm detaching from my wounded child who just wants love and attention.
Why? And by doing that, is that beneficial because then we can recognize that these aren't serving us in moving forward? Or is it because these are stories we've told ourselves have importance and therefore we've been giving them too much space?
Yeah. So when I'm so obsessed with what other people think about me, I'm not objective
Right.
and I'm not able to be authentic. I'm looking everybody else around me being like, how is what I'm saying affecting them? Do they like me? Am I funny? Do they think I'm pretty? I'm not in my own power.
Right.
I'm very much attached to that. So the more kind of detached or clear, however you want to think about it, I can be from those needs that I don't need, then I can come into my power. And that's, I think, one of the biggest changes in my life from doing this on a regular basis is I crowdsource way less.
Mm.
I ask my friends like what I should do and check in like, hey, like I used to be so concerned in different Zoom rooms when I would speak in
Right.
different classes I was in or things like, ooh, what did they think of me? How did they blah 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 blah. Before I do anything, I detach from being liked, from being adored, from all these things. So then I can just kind of show up and be. And I've noticed like, wow, there's way less replaying of things afterwards. And
Mhm.
um, yeah.
It's such an interesting way of navigating through it because words hold so much meaning to people,
Mhm.
right? And connection to things. And yeah, for me, I'm just like hearing the word and I'm like, how would I find my way in when the word detached feels like a removal somehow of my present self to the thing, rather than you did just say, and I think this is my way in, of the needs that we actually need. like there's the redundancy in that, but there are needs that we feel are important. And then there are the needs of like, we actually do need these things. And being able to separate those two allow us to move forward, right? It's like, do I actually
Yeah.
need somebody's approval, or do I desire that for X, Y, and Z reasons that would then make me feel X, Y, and Z? Or is it I actually need to be connected to my heart in this moment to be able to honestly and authentically tell my story? That's probably the main need. The other one is clouding the fact that I can't get to this second one yet because it's making me feel all those other things.
Oh,
Is that
yeah.
correct?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. It's I mean, we also say that we probably like dance between the two
Right.
also, right? Like in an audition or on stage or something, like the audience cheers and you're like, ah, and then like you do a laugh line and like there's crickets, and then your heart closes and you're like, I need them to think I'm funny, right? And so we like kind of vacillate between the two. That's also very real.
Yeah.
I think another way that might be fun to think about it, I like calling, like, I have like my human and I have my higher self.
Okay.
So like my human needs love and affection and approval and validation and all of these things. My higher self knows that I am inherently worthy and there's nothing that could make me more worthy
Right.
and enough and lovable. So you could go like, okay, my human is going to detach from all the things that they think they need from this audition or this date or this job.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to sit in the wisdom of like what truth is in this moment.
I love that. That for me resonates.
That helps.
And I
Great.
feel like, I
Yeah.
feel like it goes, it goes back to this idea of, we're taught to identify with so many quote unquote labels about who we are as people, especially artists. But really, when you sit with yourself and you recognize that the job doesn't make you worthy and the opportunities don't make you worthy, you are worthy because you're a human being who lives on this planet, and therefore you deserve everything that you could possibly achieve and receive, because that's simply your right as a human being to live on this planet.
Yeah.
And to separate those two, I would imagine gives a lot more freedom to enter into any space, no matter whether it's for an audition or simply for just existing in a room with
Yeah.
your friends, to
Yeah.
be like, this is who I am and what I deserve at all times,
Yeah.
unapologetically. Thank you
Yeah.
so very much for
Yeah.
being in my space.
Yeah.
I
I
love
love
that.
everything you just said. Yeah.
Yeah. I also am curious because you mentioned this like list that you have of alternative emotions. Am I saying this properly? The
Just a list of emotions.
yeah. How does one choose if it feels sometimes complicated, or does one need to? Like if
Oh, so usually like if we're entering into a paradox practice together, I would ask you, what is your hottest emotion?
got it.
So yes, there will be many, and when you go into the work, you clear the anger, and then underneath that is the shame, or
Right.
like then you clear the helplessness, and then underneath that is the self-doubt, or what, there's so
Right.
many layers. Yeah.
Right. I love that. I wanted to go back into this idea of when we had you on our panel many months ago, because what is time? We talked about, balancing your creative life and your artistic life and just being a person as an artist. And with this massive, gorgeous transition that you're going through, I'm curious how you are feeling in your body about the way in which your artist self is manifesting now, that it's transitioning or that it's moving through, or new creations. How is that for you?
I love that you asked that,
Thank
because
you.
no, it's so fun for me, because I used to think that like for me being creative was this.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And now I am really obsessed with this idea. Like my business is my creativity right now. I am
Correct.
pouring all of my creativity into the silly reels that I make and the emails I write to my list and the coaching that I do with clients. also being a mom to an almost 2-year-old. Like, I try so hard to be so present with him and see the world through his eyes, and that's creative. So
Correct.
yeah, my relationship with that has expanded. Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend literally today about that and how they were wanting to be more, I guess, intentional or purposeful with their art. And they were saying, do you have access to a guitar? Do you have access to a piano? And I was like, well, why? They're like, because I just want to make more art. And I was like, okay, is that actually what's happening here? Or like, what actually is going on? And they were like, well, I feel that I need to create more spaces through which I can create. And I was like, I love that. Beautiful. I also want to remind you that just because you're not quote unquote creating in what we would deem to be the main creative ways that artists express themselves doesn't make you any less of an artist. And that because you identify with creation, period, that is what makes you an artist, no matter what it is that you are doing, and how your identity is not defined by you sitting at a guitar and now you're an artist. It's like simply you desiring to be creating is what makes you an artist.
Yeah.
And, we've inherited this system of labeling that if you aren't creating in a certain type of way, then somehow that takes away from your artistry. And
Right.
what a
Yeah.
silly little minimizing way to live.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you're giving and serving in this capacity, and you are creating and you are inspiring, and it doesn't have to be just because you're standing on a stage and singing, which is a gorgeous way if that is what you want to be doing at the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So that makes me think about, okay, so then what is creativity?
yeah,
What is the source of the inspiration that is, and I am just like literally doing this physically with my body. I feel it like rise up from within.
mhm,
And so I feel that so many of us, we live up in our minds and in our
yeah,
brains. And so it makes sense then that when we're maybe on stage or when we're singing a song or dancing, we can tap into that creativity and it feels so good.
mhm,
And although that's not necessarily the case, we can very easily be in mind for that too, and analyzing and critiquing and all of that. So, but I'm really, really, really interested right now in this idea of embodiment practices, thinking about it from yoga, this, our second chakra, which governs creativity, also creative life force, sexual energy.
mhm,
That's all in the same part of our bodies. And when I started thinking about it that way, like I have created a life with my body, but we all
yeah,
have creative life force energy within our body. And how does that relate to creativity and to my art? And it's tapping into this physical sensation of moving and awakening this energy that I think is dormant for so many of us, or like
mhm,
we only open up to that energy in certain times. And so I'm really interested in, as part of my morning practice or a daily practice for myself, is to kind of move from my head down to my heart, down to my pelvis, down to my root, moving that, waking that up, and then pouring that out into the world, whether
mhm,
it's through Instagram or through a song. And maybe playing the guitar would help me tap into that. We all
yeah,
have to find our way in, but that's like my jam right now.
yeah. Well, how do you define creativity then for yourself?
I think the all those things that I just said, it's like life force.
Okay.
It's possibility. It's
Mm,
and it's something deeper than just mind alone.
right.
It's because I think our brains are incredible computers, but just left to its own without the inspiration. Actually, we should look that up. Like, I know creativity has something to do with inspiration, and that has something to do with breath. And I think inspiration is breath,
Yeah.
and is of the breath. But fact check.
Great.
Um, but so that's like embodied. It's an energy that then mixed together with our brilliant brains who um but overall right now the word that comes to me is possibility. And so my soapbox that I've been on lately is that as actors, we can be incredibly creative.
Yeah.
You give us 16 bars and we walk into a room that has people looking at us like this, and we just sing at a blank wall, and we create an entire world, and we create emotions and backstory and relationships. I mean, it's genius.
Yeah.
But when it comes to our own lives, we are also some of the most stuck people with these fixed ideas on what's possible, on what success is.
Mm-hmm.
Those two things. So I'm really interested in, like, how can we actors open up to that same imagination and creativity into our whole lives, into our industry? How can we expand our industry?
Yep.
Right?
Ooh. Yeah, no, that's so, it's like my gears are like, this is it. This is the convo. I mean, the possibility word, I feel, is the thing that unleashes gorgeous potential and mess, right? Like when I think about possibility, I think about messiness in all of like the best ways, and how process, the journey is the thing through which one can explore all the stuff into the possibility of what is. And the fear or the feelings that come up with the idea of not knowing, and therefore being messy, and therefore, embracing a process that might be, insert word here, that doesn't feel quote unquote secure, or may feel overwhelming, right? All these things, that is the sweet spot for unleashing all the stuff within you, but really creativity. Like that is the journey is the thing. And so, I mean, this could be my soapbox too, where I just, I feel so deeply that as artists, we are taught and told that unless you book that show, that is your definition of what success is. But truly, like, what are all the steps that you have taken up until that point? All of the ways in which you've emotionally, physically, financially invested and then explored in all of those spaces to get to that point. Like the times that you cried or laughed on your floor to get to that, like all of that, that is the creativity to get to the quote unquote point of success. And that is where the possibilities lie. And if you don't enjoy that process for all of those ups and downs, then where is, like, without creativity is worth it. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, just being open versus closed,
Yeah.
like possibility versus probability. That's another interesting aspect, is like most of us think that we're thinking of what's possible, but really we're thinking of what's probable based on past things.
Mm.
And so we're actually not in our imagination and going, oh my gosh, what if I could do this? And like, what if I could be a mom and a performer? I used to think that I could only be either or. What if it's this? What if it's this? Imagination, play, and let your brilliant computer brain go to work at those things. Rather than, I think what many of us do is like, well, it's a pandemic and there are not enough jobs and there's so many actors and I've already had this many auditions that didn't work out and who knows, and maybe I should, just call it quits, but from a place of like very limited possibility, linear thinking.
Yeah, scarcity in some capacity.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we lose this. I imagine you see this with your son often, and I'm making the assumption, but young kids, babies particularly, there's nothing but being present. Like there's a reason you watch a dog or a baby. It's like what you need in that moment is what you need, right? And what you desire is what you desire, and what you want is what you want, and what you don't want is what you don't want. And it's just simply seeing the world with possibility, because you don't know the limits that exist yet. Obviously, as we keep growing, you learn them. But I would imagine having your son is a gorgeous reminder on a daily basis of possibility, and like seeing the world from a fresh set of eyes all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Being present. And I think possibility is in the presence.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
This has been such a wonderful journey that I don't know if you were anticipating, but here we are. As we're like winding our time, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel for artists who are listening, wherever they are in their journey, but particularly perhaps those who are feeling stuck or who are feeling like this is a beautiful moment of possibility or transition or choice, that you may want to impart some thoughts towards?
No, usually I have so many things to say, but I really feel like I hope and feel that what we've shared will serve for those people. And if you're sitting here and you have more questions than answers, that's beautiful.
Right.
And I don't think that there will be a definitive this necessarily, but questions are such a great way in. What is possible? And starting to go back to, what am I so attached to? Why am I so attached to this working out in this specific way? Whose desire is that? Is it a family's desire? Is it because I see everybody else around me doing this? And how attached am I to that? And then I guess, okay, so here's the thing. We found our way there. It what keep taking yourself back to, what is it that I think I'm going to feel or do or be or have when I have that thing that I want so desperately? What is it? And then how can I give myself permission to have some of that now, whether it's a feeling of worthiness? How can I have some of that now? Whether it's a physical thing like financial stability, what can you do for yourself to give yourself more of that right now, rather than waiting for that Broadway show to provide that? So we're getting really clear, like really doing this. Like, what do I think I'll have when I buy a house that I don't have now? And when we start living our lives that way, we stop waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that so much. Thank you for going on this journey with me today. For those who want to perhaps work with you or learn more or listen to your podcast or all those things, what are the respectful, boundaryful ways that people can reach out to you and contact you?
Yeah. So I have 3 seasons of my podcast. They're nice and old, but they are evergreen. So you can find those wherever you find your podcast, A Balancing Act. Instagram is definitely where I'm the most active. So Analisa Leaming. And so message me there. That's where I hang out and connect with people. I have very limited room to do some big coaching. It's certainly more for people that have some years of experience under their belt. And it's for people who really want to push up their sleeves and do some work and make some like massive transformation in their life. So it's a nice, pretty big chunk investment of time and money. But you'll know in your soul if that's speaking to you. So
great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Thank you so much.